Welcome to another episode of The Inquisitive Engineer. Gas prices hit a record all-time high in June of this year, and we're all feeling the pain at the pump. But how does this pain at the pump compare to years in history? This chart shows the last 30 years of gasoline prices in actual dollars. As you can see, there was a peak in 2008 at around $4 a gallon and a peak in 2022 at around $5 a gallon. Now we know that we can't use actual dollars to compare at other times in history. We have to obviously adjust for inflation. So if we take a look at this chart tracks gasoline prices for the last 45 years, but adjusted for inflation. And as you can see, there is a peak in 2008 at about $5.10 in today's dollars. You can also see that there is a peak in the early 80s at around $4 to $4.25. At the time of recording this video, gasoline is hovering around $4 a gallon, so it is easy to compare today to the early 1980s. You may conclude that the pain at the pump here in September of 2022 is comparable to the pain at the pump in the early 1980s. But there is one more thing we need to consider to compare the pain at the pump. What we need to consider is fuel mileage. Cars today are much more fuel efficient than they were 40 years ago. If you take a look at this chart, you can see that in the early 1980s, average fuel economy was somewhere around 14, 15, 16 miles a gallon. This chart is a little dated, ending a few years ago, but doing some quick searches on the internet, we can see that current average fuel mileage for vehicles in 2022 is in the ballpark of 25.5 miles per gallon. So now we can go ahead and divide the price of fuel by the average miles per gallon and come up with a chart that looks like this. Here you can see that in the early 1980s, people had to pay about 28 to 30 cents a gallon to drive every mile. We can do a little bit of calculations and conclude that gas at about $5 a gallon in 2022 equates to about paying 19.5 cents per mile to drive, and at about current prices of $4 a gallon, that comes out to about 16 cents per mile. So quite honestly, the pain at the pump today is not nearly as bad as the pain at the pump was in the early 1980s. How expensive would gasoline have to be today to make it equivalent to the 1980s? To figure that out, all we have to do is take the peak cost per mile, which was about 30 cents per mile in the early 1980s, and multiply it by the average miles per gallon of vehicles in 2022, which is about 25.5 miles per gallon. And that number comes out to be roughly $7.65. So we would have to pay about $7.65 per gallon of gasoline here in 2022 to have the equivalent pain at the pump that Americans were experiencing in the early 1980s. So as you can see, the pain at the pump today really is not that bad, particularly when you compare it to the early 1980s. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please like and subscribe so I can keep providing you with interesting new content. As always, stay curious.